Hi. Um, I've been following the stories about or blogs on immigration across the border and how people are being dealt with, etc. And I've been in Mexico off and on, but now permanently for the last 15 years. So I know the story a little better than most or any journalist who happens to cross the border. Recently, I saw an account of somebody who'd been in the United States, probably illegally, and served in the armed forces, and now had to return back to Mexico, and didn't know any Spanish or didn't know any people to relate to back in Mexico. Well, this is pretty. If it happened, it's the minority of situations that have resulted over the last 50 years in terms of people migrating to the United States. Um, I've listened to many, many people. I'm in a small town near Oaxaca, and probably in the 1970s into the 80s, there were a lot of people. The town had just begun developing itself as a major exporter of tapetes or rugs, woven rugs, of which they're highly specialized and very good. This started in the 1970s. But previous to that, it's a small tribal village, self governed, and most people were quite poor. They lived by and large on growing corn, processing the corn, selling it slightly to other tourists, or occasionally selling some serapes to tourists. But that was all changed around 1970 when a group of buyers came along and there was a boom in the production of what were then to become tapetes or rugs made of wool mostly. Anyway, at that time, people had very large families, and things were beginning to turn from a basic communal community exchange of things without money to a moneyed economy. And at the same time, people were upgrading from their wooden buildings up into bricks, and so the costs of everything turned into pesos rather than just exchange of labor. Uh, they probably followed, probably by 30 or 40 years, what it was emerging in other developed countries, the United States, uh, with the coming of electricity, public waters, public sewage, and other things that they just hadn't had previously. But the families were still large, sometimes 7, 9 children. So I lived in connection with at least 3 of those families. And at some point, and I just found out recently, that they were probably recruited. People came down looking for cheap labor and said, well, we'll bring them up to either parts of Mexico or into the United States and use them for labor. Well, back in the 50s, there was the Baceros program. And there's still some men alive now that worked in that program coming to do seasonal, mostly agricultural labor in the States. Um, they're still receiving Social Security checks. But as the 70s and the 80s rolled in, people could not afford the things that they were becoming used to. And so a number of the children were either shipped off to jobs either in Tijuana or Mexico City, or some found their way across borders into mostly Southern California. So the ones that were brought to, say, Tijuana, they were selling T-shirts and learning some English and preparing, in the cases of several, to hop across the border and try to establish him mostly in California. And at least one case, he and his brothers went across and had several hardships, worked in very poor paying jobs where they were only paid every 2 weeks, and they were running up debts and hardly had anything to eat. But many proceeded to go on to take on gardening, in this one case, and after several years worked their way up into having their own profitable business. And at that point, the majority were probably illegal, that they'd come across the border without getting any papers. At some point, some of his family actually achieved green cards so that they were able to come across, and as even today, they come across to do work. One was a Christmas tree salesman up in San Francisco. Others were in the construction business and came and sent money back. Most everybody that came across were sending back to their families, including this Jose, that worked his way up until eventually he had an American partner and they had trucks and several workers working for them. Well, a lot of them then returned and now are back at home telling their stories. A number of them did fairly well in a couple of the families. They're still in the States in big houses, having had children who are now driving around in sports cars and enjoying the life. One daughter is in Texas and similarly employed and sending money back when she has to. Others, went the different route. One became probably a gang member in Los Angeles, came back for a while to help out his father, but then gave up on that and returned. Other of that same family with the brothers, one was probably connected with drugs and probably left back to Mexico on his own, but again to take care of his father, who is now aging, to make rugs and tend to the corn crops. But even as things progressed, California has changed quite a bit. It's now very expensive. There are communities of Zapotec in Ventura and Simi Valley, and they send money back to their families, some of which have built large houses for retirement, which they come and occasionally visit during the holiday season. But they're basically rooted in California. They have children there, they have jobs there. They're still, most of them probably, illegals, undocumented, as they would prefer to call. And now they probably feel some sort of unease that this could be uprooted and they be sent back. Highly unlikely, because the number of Mexican originally families in California is somewhat, all Hispanics included, probably close to 40% of the total populace. So there's no way that that's going to happen even after this surge, which probably came as a result of not Mexicans as much as Central Americans, Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, other places, South America, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, Venezuela. All those places have had disruptions to their economies and a massive takeover by gangs who are intimidating and guaranteeing transport back to the United States for large sums of money, which probably need to be disrupted and curtailed, and something done to correct the governments and the unlawful nature of their civil society. So when you look upon it, Mexico in this last 50 years has changed quite a bit. It is now thriving even into those communities which main transportation those days was walking by foot. Everybody has motorcycles, and people can travel around in moto taxis, and they can go visit by airplane to the beaches or travel there and the cities. And many people have cars or trucks, probably better trucks than I had when I was in the States. So there's a transformation, and it's not close to what has been described in a lot of the blogs. And where we are, the cartels don't have much influence, except drug traffic is here and is a real threat to the teenagers and adults as well. So the pictures are somewhat clouded, which sort of got me to try to restate some of these things. I run every day into people who want to practice their English again. Yeah, I was in the States for 20 years. My kid's in the Air Force now, and etc. But he came back because he'd had caught with an OUI and decided to come home instead of trying to spend time in jail or whatever. So there's a story with everybody on every block, and the returns are helping to maintain and invigorate the town as it exists today.